Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the webinar on rooftop solar. Thank you, everyone who have joined on time. We are expecting more people to join during the presentation. Rooftop solar is very relevant topic in today's time, especially for the big corporates. And Adani has been a very prestigious client for NESA from many years, and we have installed a lot of projects on different sites of Adani. So today's presentation would be focused on rooftop solar, where the founder and director of NESA Technologies, Mr. Akshat Khare, will help us to understand rooftop solar technology wise and economically wise, the details about it. Mr. Akshat Khare is an alumnus of IIT Bombay and IIM Ahmedabad. He has more than 12 years of experience in LED and solar industry. So I will now hand over things to Akshat. I guess Akshat, we can start now. Thank you.
Okay, so thanks, Sandeep. Sandeep is my colleague and we are working together. So welcome everyone. Thanks for finding out time to go through this presentation. Just to give you the background of this, in the present COVID-19 crisis, what has happened is that we keep on hearing a lot of I would say requests from people who are looking for alternate investment destinations. So surprisingly, or probably non-surprisingly, solar is actually turning out to be a very rewarding investment these days, especially in the current crisis when people are not trusting the equity markets, capital markets, debt markets. So this is something which can actually give a very safe return and a pretty decent return. So we'll talk about these things as we move on. So I guess I'll start it straight away. So first of all, just talking about the very basics about there are two kinds of rooftop systems. One is off-grid system and the other one is called as on-grid system. So here this is the picture of an off-grid system where you have a solar panel and the solar panel charges the battery through a charge controller. Then the inverter converts this power from the battery and it converts the DC power into AC power, and that is being used to run the load in the house. Whatever is the excess power required, that comes from the grid, which is shown separately over here. So this is the very basic diagram of a off-grid solar system. So here the point to be noted is that there is a presence of a battery, which means you can actually store power here and you can use it as and when you please. About the off-grid systems, there are a lot of misconceptions. So one of the most common misconceptions is this, that solar always means free electricity. And that actually is a wrong notion to make. The reason is threefold. One is that you have a battery in place, and the battery requires constant top-up of water if it is a tubular battery, or it would require replacement after 5 to 7 years if it is lithium-ion battery or gel battery. So that cost has to be added, which makes the running cost not so free. Second problem is the dust. Now dust can actually can play havoc with solar generation. So if you have dust accumulated over your solar panels, then the generation can actually go down from 100% to even up to 10%. So that is a drastic reduction in power generation that you can actually get because of dust. So it has to be cleaned on a regular basis. So that cost has to be added, which would probably be in terms of any manpower that you employ to remove the dust. The third one is slightly more technical and more interesting, which is called as non-solar priority. What this means is that a lot of systems today being installed come with non-solar priority, in which case what happens is the grid can actually charge the battery. Solar priority means that in the presence of grid and in the presence of solar, the solar will be given priority to charge the battery and the grid will not charge the battery. But a lot of cheap installations as well as a lot of, I would say, less sophisticated installations do not come with these kinds of features. So those ones have to be taken into account, because otherwise you may actually end up paying more, because what happens in those cases is you have a solar panel on the top of your house, and during the night time the grid charges the battery because there is no solar power available, and at the in the morning the batteries are already full, so the solar will not be doing anything, and hence this cycle keeps on getting repeated. So what has practically happened is that people have actually increase in their electricity bill after installing the solar system, so which totally defeats the purpose. By the way, I think we forgot to clarify. I think we might have put everybody on mute here, so that we can first complete the presentation, but be absolutely free to ask as many questions as you want at the end of the presentation, and I'll be more than happy to address them. So that was the off-grid system. Now coming to the second type of solar system, which is called as the on-grid system. Here you have solar panels which can convert, and that straight away goes to an inverter, and the inverter converts that DC power to AC power. And then there is a net meter in between. It's a bi-directional meter. So whatever is the household requirement, that would be given through the solar panel, and whatever is the excess will come from the grid. But if we are generating more than what we are consuming, then bi-directional meter has the capacity to even feed those units into the, so it can work both ways. The grid can feed power as well as it can take power. So that means no excess generation from your side will get affected because of that. So this one, there's no battery here, and this is what we will be focusing on in this entire presentation, and this is what has become the base as far as all solar installations in India are concerned. Now we'll keep our focus on the Gujarat residential solar policy to calculate certain returns on investment. So to begin with, the target of residential projects for last year was 600 megawatts. That project is already over now. I think a total of 490 megawatts was achieved, which is still a pretty decent number as far as the target achieving is concerned. Previously, there used to be a 30% subsidy, but now that got changed to 20% and 40%, a mix of 20% and 40% subsidy. It had a 5-year on-site warranty. There is no limit on the installation capacity, so you can install as much as your roof permits. There is remote monitoring of generation, which means you can actually, sitting at home, monitor how many units are being generated in your system. Then this one was a little controversial point, where the solar cells were required to be of Indian make, while the inverter could have been of any make. Now I bring a doubtful face over here because there are very few companies which are manufacturing solar cells. In fact, Adani is one of them. While there are many companies who are manufacturing inverters. So there was a bit of supply chain issue because of scarcity of solar cell manufacturers in India while this project was going on. Then the excess electricity units that you generate, they are to be reimbursed at rupees 2.25 rupees per unit. So whatever units you are generating, they will be netted against your electricity bill. But anything more than the electricity bill, those would be reimbursed corollary of 2019 and 20. This was the tender that had come out, and as you can see, these were the rates. The rates were for 1 kilowatt up to 10 kilowatts, and they varied from about 46,800 to something like 43,000. Could you just hold on for a sec? Adit, I'm getting a call from you. Is there anything? Am I audible? Adit, can you hear me?
No. So there seems to be a problem with your internet connection. It shows your internet connection is unstable.
One second. I think it seems to be okay only, but I
Okay,
think
it's
yesterday it
perfect
wasn't a
now.
problem, right? Now is it okay?
Yes, okay, we can continue.
Okay, feel free to point any such thing during the presentation itself.
Yes, sure.
Yeah. So the rooftop capacity was from 1 to 10 kilowatts, for which subsidy was made available. And that varied from about 46,800 rupees per watt to about 43,000 rupees per kilowatt. Not per watt, sorry, it's per kilowatt. Now, these rates, by the way, are already over in the previous tender. The new rates are supposed to come, and you can expect the rates to be somewhere around this, possibly a bit higher, because nobody had anticipated that the Indian make cells would become a little more expensive than what that the bidders had bid for. So, but you can fairly assume that these were the rates last year, and these could be the rates for the upcoming year as well. Now we talk about the industrial solar policy. Now, for industries in general, they have been broadly divided into two categories. One is the general industries, and the other one is the MSMEs. So for general industries, the maximum installation capacity that has been allowed is 50% of the sanctioned load. So unlike the residential policy, you have a cap on the maximum solar installation that you can have. The excess units are reimbursed at an even lower rate of rupees 1.75 per unit. There are 40%. There is a 40% accelerated depreciation benefit available for industries. So that is a great benefit, as we'll see in the analysis as we come across. But there are no capital subsidy. So in residential rooftop, you get capital subsidies. For industrial rooftop, there is no capital subsidy. If we talk about MSMEs, which is the second category, there is no limit on the installation capacity. So that is in line with the residential policy. But this one is again a controversial point, which says that the billing cycle has to be 15 minutes. What that basically means is that during 15 minutes, whatever you have generated, you have to consume that only. If you don't consume that, then you will be reimbursed at only 1.75 rupees per unit. And that is one of the major points why this MSME policy in Gujarat hasn't taken off at all. Because within 15 minutes, you can very well be generating excess units as well. And then the overall return on investment comes to a very low figure, because you are getting reimbursed only at rupees 1.75 per unit, as against the highest slab that you might be operating at. Similarly, on Sundays or on holidays, when the factory is not working, during those days also you will only be reimbursed at 1.75 rupees per unit. So in my opinion, that is not a very good incentive for MSMEs, and which is exactly why this has not really taken off. Then the other two benefits, like 40% accelerated depreciation and capital subsidies, are as it is. So they apply for both MSMEs as well as general industries. Now, talking about the financial calculations, which I have done over here based on certain data and based on certain assumptions. So first of all, I'll list those assumptions so as to make it very clear. What I've tried to do is that I've tried to make assumptions as realistic as possible, so that whatever return on investment we calculate is as close to reality as possible and not just a theoretical figure. So I have made 6 assumptions while calculating this payback period and doing the financial analysis. The first one is that for since the warranty is 5 years, after 5 years, it will be a 5% additional annual maintenance cost for maintaining these systems. So there is so this 5% of additional maintenance cost has been added. So the decade has been assumed 2.5 per annum, but I have still assumed it to be 3% per annum. The assumed life of solar panels is 15 years, as against 25 years guaranteed by the manufacturers. So let us assume that for 15 years we can still, if manufacturers giving them a life of 25 years, we can still claim it to be 15 years and expect good results during those 15 years. And we expect 7 years as a life for the inverter. We have also considered the dusting cost of 4 times a month, using every year as the inflation rate of 5%. So that has been taken into account. We have these solar panels probably at 20, they will, and the inverter would be replaced after 7 years. That is another assumption that we have made. The fifth assumption is that there would be an additional cost for customization. So since we're talking about residential solar here, while installing at residences, because of the design of the house, there could be some elevated structures required, which can result into additional out of pocket expenses, which would be about 30,000 rupees. I've assumed that much, which is what we have found to be the case with even our customers. Then this one is important. The marginal cost of electricity is assumed that the cost of electricity that we pay at our homes is something like 6 rupees, maybe 5 rupees, and something like that. But that actually is the average. When we talk about the marginal cost of electricity, that means we are talking about the highest slab. And most of us, in fact, all the customers who opt for solar panels, solar rooftop installations, are actually operating at the highest slab. And at the highest slab, if you add the FPPA charges and the government duty, the net cost to the residents comes to 8.06 rupees per unit, which is very, very high. And actual rate, not just an assumed rate. The torrent power, 6 rupees per unit as of today. This rate may vary from state to state. This rate may vary from distribution company to distribution company. So that is why the results might be a bit different, but we can assume it would be minor changes from state to state and from distribution company to distribution company. But we have taken this as a base for doing all the calculations. And the sixth assumption is that we will be analyzing a typical 5 kilowatt installation based on these assumptions. Now we come to the financial part, which is the most interesting part of this analysis, the return on investment for a 5 kilowatt residential house. So I've done all this calculation and the analysis. I'll only be presenting the final conclusions over here. If anybody wants to have a look at those models, please feel free to ask me and I'll send those to you. Initially, the investment required would be 1.8 lakhs from the customer for a 5 kilowatt installation. The approximate net savings per year that you will get is about 52,000 rupees per annum. This is again based on all the assumptions which I made, and so that is why it's a very realistic figure. So with these things, the payback period comes to about 3 to 4 years. Now this is a great achievement for solar, because just about 5 years or 7 years back, this payback period was in the range of 10 years. Now with all these policies, with the policies and with the prices coming down, it has come to a very realistic 3 to 4 years kind of a payback period, which is a great achievement for the solar industry. And now if we talk about the return on investment, this the IRR, and over 15 years, which is the assumed life of this system, and based on again the assumptions made in the previous slide, it comes to a huge 25.5% per annum. And even if you are a more pessimistic customer and you feel that, it may not last for 15 years, let me only calculate it for 10 years. I don't know what is going to happen after 10 years. Even then, the sorry, the IRR comes to a very handsome 22.9%. And this is better than any of the mutual fund benchmarks, debt mutual funds, and any other benchmarks that you might come across in the present scenario. And most importantly, this is more or less risk-free return, simply because as long as you are sure that the installation has been done properly, you are actually bound to get these many units over a 25-year or a 15-year period. So that is what is the most attractive thing about solar panels today. Now, if we talk about the industrial solar, the analysis goes very much in the similar way. We have again made 6 assumptions. The first 4 are the same. So I'll not go through those 4 assumptions again. The 5th assumption is a bit different. Here, the marginal cost of electricity is assumed to be 7.27 rupees per unit. Again, the base taken over here is torrent power. And this is the marginal cost of electricity as defined in the previous slides. So this is the highest slab at which all the industries are operating. If we talk about commercial complex, that's even higher than residential. So 7.27 rupees per unit is for industrial. That is for godowns. That is for manufacturing hubs. For commercial hubs within the city, it is actually 8.3 rupees per unit. So that means it is even higher, but we have assumed it to be an industrial unit, and so it is 7.27 rupees per unit. There would be additional 40% that would be made available to the industrial company which has put up this plant. So that has been taken into account, which is not available for residential customers. And here we'll be analyzing a 50 kilowatt non-MSME installation. So for reasons explained before, we will not be considering MSME installation, but a simple general industrial installation, and assumed to be at the MNRE benchmark rates. So that means at regular, in regular conditions, where you have no other fringes attached with the installation, which is, let's say, a factory or any kind of a company, we will be calculating the post-tax calculations. So we'll be doing the post-tax calculations. Now, again, talking about the financials here, the summary of the results is something like this. First of all calculations are post-tax. So the initial investment net of GST comes to about 22 lakhs for a 50 kilowatt installation. The approximate net savings per year that you will get based on the previous assumptions is about 5.1 lakhs per year is what you are going to save. The payback period comes to about 4 to 4.5 years with this. This is again post-tax. And the IRR, the return on investment for 15 years, comes to 17.7% post-tax and 24.6% pre-tax. If you want to compare it, let's say, against any FD, which a corporate might be willing to invest in, then an FD might offer you 6 to 7% of rate of return, while this thing pre-tax will offer you 24.6% rate of return. And again, for a more pessimistic customer, it will be for 10 years, it will still be 14.4% post-tax, which means about 20% pre-tax. So in a nutshell, what we can say is that for both residential as well as industrial customers, the return on investment is better than any other benchmark, any other investment destination that they might be, that they might be having an alternative of. Now, this is just a comparison of all kinds of electricity costs from various sources. We have primarily 5 various sources from which electricity is generated. Wind and solar are the renewable energies, and coal, gas, and nuclear would be the non-renewable energy sources. Now, there is a concept called as levelized cost of electricity, which means what is the per unit cost of generation from these sources over its useful life. So, which is generally assumed to be about 25 years for all of these. So if we talk about wind and solar, the levelized cost of electricity today has come down to a very impressive 2.4 to 2.8 rupees for wind. And for solar, it has come down to 2.6 to 3 rupees. Against this, if we talk about coal, which is the primary source of electricity in India, it varies from 1.5 to 4.5 rupees per unit. So that means it could be cheaper than solar, but in certain cases, it is even more expensive than solar. If we talk about smaller plants, that means less than 1 gigawatt of coal plants, the actual electricity cost, the actual generation cost of generating electricity in India is in the range of 3.5 to 4.5 rupees per unit. Only for very large plants like the one in Singrauli or Mundra, it comes down to about 1.5 to 2 rupees per unit. What that just tells us is that today solar has actually reached what we call as a grid parity, which means it is giving us power almost as expensive or as cheap as a thermal plant, and this gap is only going to get further and further narrowed down, with solar could actually become cheaper than coal very soon. It already is, by the way. So it already is, by the way. Only very large where the coal is available in abundance, only there solar is a bit more expensive than coal. Then gas, which is one of the primary sources, mainly in the Middle East, US, and a few European countries. There it is at par with coal, 1.5 to 4 rupees per unit. And nuclear is the more expensive one at about 4 to 7 rupees per unit. So this analysis of levelized cost of electricity does tell us that renewable energy have actually arrived. And it's not just on paper, it is not something only to be driven by government initiatives, but now there is a lot of economics as well, which drives these projects. Now, we will also be doing an interesting climate impact analysis of this. A lot of people have asked me in the past that fine, solar does not produce any pollution while it is generating electricity, but there must be a lot of pollution going on when you produce solar panels, when you manufacture solar panels, and they are absolutely right about it. When you are manufacturing solar panels, there is electricity consumption into it, there is carbon emission into it, and when you're disposing of a solar plant, there again there is carbon emission. So there is a concept called as life cycle analysis, which means over its useful life from birth to death, how much of climate impact is solar or wind or coal is doing on Mother Nature. And this has been divided into 3 stages. One is called as stage 1, which is the production of renewable energy plant. That means the production of solar panels and the installation of solar panels. Then there is stage 2, which is the operation of useful life of the plant. Sorry. So that would be assumed about 25 years or so. And then there is stage 3, which is the disposal of plant. That means after it has gone through its useful life, then you have to dispose it off. And are there any carbon emissions involved in that? So this is the summary of the whole analysis. So I have this analysis, and this is again the summary of the results. The emissions during the production, that is during stage 1 for solar, is something like 650 kgs of carbon emission happens per kilowatt of solar production. And wind, 325 kgs of carbon emissions happen for 1 kilowatt of wind production. So compared to solar, wind actually turns out to be a bit more green. So it is greener that way. And if we talk about the entire life cycle, that means from stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, all 3 combined together, then if you do all the analysis and come out with the final results, the results are something like this, that solar will not give 0 carbon emissions per unit, but it will give about 15 to 20 grams of carbon emissions per unit if you take the entire life cycle analysis. Similarly, wind will give you about 7.5 to 10 grams of carbon emissions per unit. Compared to these two, the non-renewable source like coal actually emits 800 to 1000 grams of carbon emissions per unit of electricity generated. So this puts that discussion at rest, that solar and wind are very much green compared to coal. They're not zero emission, that is for sure, but they are much, much lower compared to any kind of a other thermal plant, any kind of other electricity generating plant that you might come across. Now, if we talk in terms of carbon emissions, then the carbon emissions go something like this. If we talk about unit generation, okay, how much carbon emissions are we generating per unit? So if it is solar, I'm only talking about solar, by the way, in this slide. So if it is solar is saving 780 grams of carbon emissions per unit generated. So in terms of unit generation, we are getting 780 grams of less carbon emissions into the environment for every unit generated. Now, in terms of the installation capacity, if we have to view it, then it is something like this. Let us take the example of a 50 kilowatt installation for a 50 watt atmosphere, and that is huge. And if we talk about, and 50 kilowatt is a very small installation these days compared to the megawatt installations happening. If we talk about a 1 megawatt installation, then you are actually saving 11.7 lakh kgs of carbon emissions every year. And this is per year. Okay, so that means every year that gets added to it, you can multiply it by those many years to calculate the carbon emissions that you have saved into the atmosphere. And if we talk about CER, CER basically stands for certified emission reductions. And these are actually traded in the world market as well. So for every carbon emission that you have saved, you get some kind of a certificate, and that can be traded in the global markets. So one CER actually is equivalent to saving 1000 kgs of carbon emissions. So again, talking about these two installations, so for 50 kilowatt, you will be getting almost 58.4 CERs in 1 year. For 1 megawatt, you will be getting about 1170 CERs per annum. And this can actually be monetized, but for that, the installation has to be bigger. Generally, for less than 1 megawatt, it is not worthwhile to go through the process of CER reimbursement. Now, this is just the last slide. A few points to keep in mind when anybody goes for any kind of an installation. One thing is this, that the higher efficiency solar panel does not necessarily mean better performance. So there are various different technologies in solar panels, starting with the most efficient, which is a multi-junction solar panel. Then come bifacial solar panels, monocrystalline, polycrystalline, thin films, etc. So there is always a confusion among the customers which one to use. Now, what we have to realize is this, that higher efficiency does not mean higher performance. It only means that the space used will be less. So a 300 watt of highly efficient panel is going to give you the same results as a 300 watt of a less efficient panel. Only the less efficient panel will take more space. That is all. So just to draw a comparison amongst these, polycrystalline will be having something like 16 to 17% efficiency in India. Monocrystalline will be having about 17 to 18% efficiency. Bifacial is a very promising technology, and that would be having efficiency about 21% or something. And there are multi-junction panels which are damn expensive, but they have a tested efficiency of something like even 35%. But then from a customer's point of view, what you're interested in is the total solar generation. If you have enough space as a customer, you should go for, I would recommend going for cheaper panels, because it doesn't matter. You can actually bring down your cost. But if space is a constraint, then definitely you should go for higher efficient panels. Then another very important point is, it's not just the solar panel and the inverter which matters. The wires, the thickness of the wires, the connectors, current rating of the connectors, junction boxes, and everything that goes inside into the overall assembly of this solar installation has an equally significant impact on the solar generation. A lot of time the solar panel is good, the inverter is good, the generation is good, but then that generation is getting wasted in the wires itself. So it will not make much sense unless and until you optimize the overall assembly rather than optimizing just a few components of the overall installation. And hence the installation has to be done in a very systematic way so that everything can be optimized and solar generation can be at its peak. Otherwise, there are a lot of people who have even after using the best available panels in the world have not been able to get good solar generation, mainly because the overall assembly has not been engineered very well. Now, talking about the economic sense, if you are a customer and you are mainly focused, then the rule of thumb is very simple: don't produce more than what you consume. So as we can see that if you produce anything excess of what you are consuming, then the rate of reimbursement is pretty low at 1.75 rupees per unit or 2.25 rupees per unit. So then the return on investment that we're talking about is not all that great. So for example, the payback period that we calculated was about 3 to 4 years. If you get reimbursed at 2.25 rupees per unit, then the payback period will go to something like 10 to 12 years, which is not a very economically viable proposition. And hence, for economic sense, it is better to produce only what you consume. And the way to design it would be count the annual units that you consume. So if you look at your electricity bill, you will be able to see how many units have you consumed in the last 1 year. And based on that, you can come out with what is my optimal size of the solar panel required, which will produce around this much of electricity for me every year. And if you want to go by a very broad thumb of rule, you can simply look at the sanction load in electricity bill and go for about 50 to 60% of that sanction load as your solar installation. And that would generally be the most economical solution for you. But if you have environmental sense, you take pride in the fact that we are green, we are saving carbon emissions into the world, so then produce as much as possible. So there is absolutely no limit on that after that. Also, one very important fact is this, that against the popular conception, against the popular belief that scorching heat, if the sun is fully available and there is very high temperature outside, people feel that the solar generation would be that much higher. That is not the case actually. It actually means lower generation. Solar panels are optimized at 25 degrees Celsius. So if the temperature outside becomes higher, even if you have very, very good sun available, the generation capacity of the solar panel will go down. So that is why you will see that better than Rajasthan, Kutch, these areas, Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh are better areas for installing solar panels, for installing solar plants, because they have clear sunlight as well as lower temperatures. So that can very well be done in places like Ladakh. And I hope now that now there would be more solar plants coming in those areas now that one can buy land over there. And lastly, solar makes a lot of economic sense, as we have seen over here. The cheapest bid that has come for very large megawatt plants in solar has come to something like 2.44 rupees per unit, which is a fabulous rate. We are paying 8.06 rupees per unit, and they are producing solar power at 2.44 rupees per unit in Rajasthan, which is a phenomenal thing. And as we have seen that you can actually expect 23 to 25% IRR, or the rate of return, from having installations at your home or on your industries. And these are the various sources that I have used for doing my analysis. The data and everything is available in these sources. So if we, so I think that brings my presentation to an end. Now, if we have to summarize the entire presentation in just one line, this is what I would like to say. Forget capital markets. The return that you are getting from solar is much better than what you are getting in these turbulent times otherwise. Anyway, so this is just a little bit of an exaggeration, I know that. But if you look at all the economics and you want to have some good returns without taking too much of risk, this is the best option available these days. And this is just my email ID and Twitter handle in case you want to get in touch. So that completes whatever I had to say uh, about today's presentation. And if there are any doubts, I can very well take them up over here. Thank you for being such patient listeners.